If American children are suffering the same kind of post-traumatic stress disorder that we see in soldiers of war, what does that mean for our communities? And what can we do to help these children? Thank you for joining us in this discussion. I'm Laura Frank, President of News at Rocky Mountain PBS. We've just watched the documentary Wounded Places. It's part of the PBS series called Raising of America. And now some Colorado experts on childhood trauma will join us for discussions about what the evolving research means and what Colorado is doing to protect its children. First, let's turn to Dr. Desmond Runyan, the Jack and Vicki Thompson Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Colorado and the Executive Director of the Kemp Center for the Prevention and Treatment of Child Abuse and Neglect. Dr. Runyan, you've been researching childhood abuse for more than 30 years. Have you seen the kind of PTSD that we saw in this documentary? Have you seen that in our communities here?
We see that all the time. Children are referred to our center or to Children's Hospital for evaluation for abuse and neglect. And children who are withdrawn, who have excessive fear, who are hypervigilant, those are the kinds of kids that we see in our clinic.
What are the kinds of things that are sending them there? What is causing the PTSD?
Well, it depends at the age of the children. Young children are affected by physical abuse and sexual abuse, but actually one of the biggest causes of some of the problems they have is witnessing domestic violence. Young children at age 4 and 6 appear to be more seriously damaged by witnessing domestic violence than themselves being a victim of physical abuse from a psychological standpoint.
That's amazing. So it's actually not the child experiencing the physical abuse or the mental or what have you, himself or herself. It's actually witnessing someone else. Why is that? Why does the brain?
Children who are very young have relative little sense of what's going on in terms of what's okay and not okay because they don't have comparisons. So they don't know that they're being spanked more harshly or that being put in the corner and being made to go outside in the cold snow are not something that's common. But the person that they look to for security and in food and safety and nurture and love is that mother. And if the mother is terrified and screaming and being beaten up, the message for that child is there's no safe place. This world is a dangerous place and everybody is a victim.
You have called for a game-changing paradigm shift. Tell us what you mean by that.
So one of the things that we've been concerned about is that getting reported to social services is a little bit like getting a speeding ticket. If you're in the right neighborhood where there's a camera or a cop, you'll get caught, but you could do the same thing in someplace else and you could speed even faster and not get caught. To some extent, child maltreatment is like that. If you live in an environment where there are lots of other people around, if you live in an apartment building and they hear the child screaming, if you're going to school and you see and if the child's going to school and bruises are noted, or if the child's seriously injured and goes to a children's hospital or a general hospital and gets spotted, they'll get reported. But there's nobody reporting the child who is beaten, who doesn't go to school the next day, and nobody sees the bruises. Nobody is reporting the kid who was choked or threatened or knocked down.
What are the first steps for moving into that kind of paradigm shift?
Well, so part of it is we need to think about the well-being of children. Colorado is one of 5 states that has a grant from the Centers for Disease Control to actually look at the environment and how to improve the environment for children. It's called Essentials for Childhood. And the goal here is to try and use what's called collective impact, to try and get people thinking in all kinds of different ways about how to improve the lives of children. And it can go from negotiating with businesses in town to think about family-friendly business practices that allow parents to be there for their kids, parental leave policies that make it so parents don't feel like they're torn between putting food on the table and giving love to their kids.
We have now in Colorado had a child abuse hotline for a year, and I think in 2015 there were slightly more than 200,000 calls to that hotline. Most of them were calls from teachers and law enforcement, the people you might expect, and who are required by law to report suspicion of child abuse. There's been some talk about wanting to expand that to people who are just everyday people, maybe not like you, but more like me, who see something, suspect something. What should people be on the lookout for? And is it important to make sure that we're all vigilant about the condition of children in our communities.
Exactly. It's really important that we all be thinking about children's well-being. And a lot of people think, well, that's another family. I'm not going to get involved. I don't want to stick my neck out. I might be wrong. Reporting suspected child abuse, it's suspected. It's not proven. You don't have to prove it. Social services and Children's Hospital, our medical team will get involved in helping to sort those out. But those are often, if you're worried about it, it's a family that needs help, and trying to call them some help is what you're doing. And so it's not like it's a punishment, it's like it's a benefit to call folks.
So we should give that number. It's 844-CO for kids. Easy to remember. 844 Colorado for kids. CO for kids. That's 844-264-5437. Dr. Runyan, thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
Glad to be here. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. With us now is Dr. Lydia Prado, who is Vice President of Child and Family Services at the Mental Health Center of Denver. Welcome to Rocky Mountain PBS, Dr. Prado.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I'll say the Mental Health Center of Denver just opened a new campus. What is the name of it?
It's the Dahlia Campus for Health and Wellbeing.
And that's in Northeast Denver?
Northeast Park Hill.
Oh, excellent. One of the residents there, a longtime and well-known resident, Anna Jo Haynes, said at the time of the groundbreaking, she asked the question, how are the children? And I'd like to start there. Both in Northeast Denver and the rest of the state, how are the children in Colorado?
Yes, Anna Jo was referring to an African kind of proverbial story where that's how you would assess the health and well-being of a community, is by asking how the children are, as an indicator, again, of overall health and well-being. And I think the children are resilient, the children are strong, the children are bright and intelligent and have a lot of potential. However, there are a number of children in Northeast Park Hill and in the state of Colorado that are living under some very trying circumstances, and they're stressful.
I asked Dr. Runyan this earlier when he was with us. I would like to ask you too, have you seen in your work the kind of PTSD that we saw in the documentary in Wounded Places? Have you seen that here in our communities?
Oh, yes, definitely. We do. We treat that. We see that. I see that every day in the children and families that walk through our doors. Again, we have a number of folks who perhaps, like people talk about poverty and the impact of poverty, so who are living with crowded conditions, who are worrying about where their next meal comes from, who are not able to find what they need when they need it, who are worried about the education of their children, who are worried about not having safe places to move around. And really, some of the things that I'm sure we take for granted are not, they can't count on safety and quiet and calm and resources being available to them.
So not only with the children, but with the adults as well, and it's
absolutely
working together.
Because we see, what impacts the mom or dad impacts their little one. And so we have to be thinking about supporting and being comfortable and sustaining health in a family, because it really is about a relationship between a little one and his or her caregiver that, for me, provides the protection that would help mitigate the impacts of living under these stressful conditions.
We saw in this film a lot about research that is going on now, and I know this is an area that the center keeps up with very carefully. What do you see are some of the most promising areas of research right now? What are we learning?
We are learning a lot about brain development, a lot about when it starts, a lot about plasticity of the brain, but a lot about how toxic stress impacts development and how early that happens. So, for instance, we know that there are 700 neural connections that are made every second in that first year of life. So if there is stress that's impacting that, it has a direct impact on the brain structure and architecture, so that those impacts last a lifetime. And so the earlier that we can support and provide children and families what they need to have that not happen, the better off we're going to be. And now we're learning that happens in utero, that mom's stress while she's pregnant impacts a developing child. So all of that, to me, I think speaks to where we need to intervene, where we need to put our money, where we need to pay attention, and where we need to make a difference.
On the money front, we hear people talk about, and including in this film, a lot about the spending on education versus spending on incarceration. And here in Colorado, there's definitely a difference. I think we spend 3 times more on incarceration than we do on education, $30,000 versus less than 10. But it's true in every state in the nation that we spend more per inmate than we do per student. Why do people make this comparison of incarceration versus education? What is the impact of that?
Well, I think many times people make the comparisons of that. We understand that we're spending a lot more money where we shouldn't be, in a sense. That when I think about it, it's kind of like, how does a community benefit from having this large group and all of these expenses and incarceration, wherein we could all benefit from supporting and sustaining and educating bright, young, talented, exceptional, creative people who would then, be participants fully in a thriving community.
And given what the research is showing now, if we were able to intervene earlier, then it could be an either-or choice. We may not have to deal with impacts that might lead someone toward a life of incarceration. We could actually spend the money on education
we could actually launch
instead.
people really well and get, yes.
Rocky Mountain PBS News did an investigation a little over a year ago about untreated mental health problems in Colorado and found that the costs of untreated mental health actually cost each and every Coloradan about $1,000 a year. That's things like lost wages or preventable medical care or time incarcerated. All of that spending dwarfs what is spent actually on direct care. Why is this such an uphill battle? Why are we having these either-or conversations? Why is it so difficult to address?
I think there's a lot of history and misunderstanding about mental illness, and it's like we don't have this conversation about heart disease, right? We don't have this conversation about brain disease, and yet mental illness is a brain dysfunction, and we have never thought of mental illness in the same way as we think of physical illness. And I think part of that conversation is really taking mental illness and understanding that as a physical illness or a disability of some type. You might have diabetes, which limits you in this way. You might have this. It's been stigmatized very differently than we have with some of our primary physical concerns. So there is a lot of stigma around talking about mental illness, and I think we need to switch the conversation to supporting mental health and well-being, because that seems to be where people want to go. It's the same conversation, but just a different perspective and a different way of addressing the issue. But who wants to be associated with mental illness when it has all of this baggage along with it?
And yet 1 out of every 4
Right.
adult Coloradans and 1 out of every 5 teens will face some sort or experience some sort of mental illness within any given year. So there are very few of us who are not affected, either
Right.
directly or
Mm-hmm.
indirectly. What can we do to help? What can the individual person do?
I think we need to have the conversation that you just started. We know that 1 in 5, or 1 in 4 adults, 1 in 5 young people. And in order to help those young people, so I'm again, child and family, we need to start talking about what's going on with young people and normalizing what's going on in young people, because they also, what's reported to me when I talk to them is they feel very isolated and feel like they're the only person. 1 in 5, and they're feeling like they're the only one that is struggling or isn't feeling well or is battling depression or is having dark thoughts. And we need to, again, let them know that that is not uncommon. They are not alone. We need to start having that conversation amongst ourselves and feeling comfortable about that.
Dr. Prado, thank you for helping open this conversation.
You're quite welcome, Laura. Thank you for having me.
You may join the conversation and learn more at our website, rmpbs.org.